Welcome, dear listeners, to another fascinating episode of the London History Podcast, where we delve into the vibrant and diverse past of this great city. I am your host, Hazel Baker, a qualified London tour guide and founder of londonguidedwalks.co.uk. Whether you're a born and bred Londoner or a curious listener, join us on a journey through time as we explore the city together. Each episode is supported by show notes, transcripts, photos and further reading, all to be found on our website. If you enjoy what we do, then you'll love our guided walks and private tours that we offer throughout the year, all bookable online at londonguidedwalks.co.uk. Subscribe now to never miss an episode. And if you enjoy the show, please leave us a review and rating to help spread the word to other history lovers. Nestled amidst the hustle and bustle of London, 2 Temple Place stands on the north bank of the Thames, a place where the past whispers secrets to those who are willing to listen. It's a building with a story to tell, and today we're here to uncover some of its mysteries. As we step into this historical treasure trove, we're joined by Camden tour guide Maggie Coates, someone who knows 2 Temple Place like the back of her hand. Together, we'll explore its architectural marvels, delve into its fascinating exhibitions, and uncover the stories that make this place a living testament to the city's grandeur. Maggie is one of our London Guided Walks' tour guides, doing her World War II and Churchill tour, and also magical Bloomsbury. So welcome, Maggie.
Hello, Hazel.
Today, I think, we'll be having a look at the bed, addressing its architecture and its history, and also some of its fascinating exhibitions, because this is a bit of a hidden gem. And I don't think many people would have actually really noticed this before. So before we get into it, and maybe it's worth if you give our listeners a brief overview of maybe where 2 Temple Place is and its historical relevance to London.
Okay, it's 2 Temple Place is its address. So it's not far from Temple Tube Station, overlooking Embankment Gardens. And that's the reason for it being there, really. That whole area was redeveloped in the Victorian era. And previously, all the industry, the buildings around there had been related to Thameside activities. And it was chosen by its owner, William Waldorf Astor, as being quite a secretive little place. When it was built, it was between 2 large buildings. It's next to Middle Temple. So there was a large Victorian library, which sadly was destroyed during the Second World War. But it had a tall, steeped, gabled roof. And on the other side was a very tall building that belonged to the London School Board. So it was a small building nestling among big buildings, even from the beginning. And now it's surrounded by modern office developments going up to the Strand. It is still a hidden gem, I think.
It really is. It's one of those ones that unless you really walk past and look at, you're so maybe focusing on the little alleyway to get through to Fleet Street or focusing on to get into to Temple, you don't really notice it. And I suppose that's part of the magic, isn't it?
It is. We quite often, I'm a volunteer there when the exhibition is open for 4 months of the year. And quite often people come in and say, I've often passed it. I've often thought, what is this building? Or I used to work around here, passed it every day, and didn't even realise it was open. So yes, it isn't known very widely, but hopefully it will get more so as the years go by.
Yes, indeed. And it has been host to a number of fascinating exhibitions over the years. And can you maybe share some of the most memorable ones?
It opened to the public about 11 years ago when it was bought by the Bulldog Trust, a charity that was set up to run it. And the first exhibition was about William Morris, which obviously there's a link in time there because it's a Victorian building. It's at the same time as William Morris, which was pretty popular. In fact, there are still a couple of items in the building from that exhibition. And then each year, the brief has been to introduce collections in the rest of Great Britain that highlights from some collections that aren't well known around a particular theme. So we've had things like the gems that were collected by the cotton magnates of Manchester, so the Cornish artists So it's had that brief. Last year we had a slight break from that because of the leftover from COVID. They weren't able to develop the exhibitions, but this year we've returned with an exhibition I'll tell you about in a minute. The most popular exhibition they had was in 2019 when they tied in with the bicentenary of John Ruskin. Mm-hmm. And they were overwhelmed with visitors that year, maybe a little bit too much because it is only a small building, but it was a great chance to see some of the collections from Sheffield and the Lake District that he was linked with. So that's been their remit. And then they've got quite creative with the themes that they've taken up around different materials. The last one had a more worldwide brief. It was about the development of pottery in Africa and then the influence of that on UK industries in the 20th century. Always interesting, always something different.
Yeah, pretty wide brief. And the Bulldog Trust you've just mentioned, that's why there is a sign of a bulldog hanging outside. That all makes sense now.
That's right, yes. People laugh at that.
It's one of the clues in our temple treasure hunt, but there you go. Maybe. Wonderful. So you mentioned about the latest exhibition. Tell us about that.
This year's exhibition is called The Glass Heart, and it's about glass as a medium for both stained glass and standalone vessels, as they're called. And it brings together the collections from Sunderland's National Glass Centre, the Stained Glass Museum in Ely, and the Stourbridge Glass Museum, which are all centres for glass production. And you think, I didn't know Sunderland was a centre for glass production, but when you think of Pyrex, which everybody had a piece of Pyrex in their house, it shows that it was a delicate but sturdy material that had many sorts of uses, and obviously as a medium for art as well. So there's some fantastic pieces that are complete flights of fancy, and there are some that are very practical and commemorative. So all kinds of interesting things. For example, there's a little glass boat that commemorates which was very popular in the Victorian era and was mass-produced, commemorates the heroic exploits of Grace Darling in the lifeboat where she saved so many passengers. And it's also, this exhibition it could have a huge brief because obviously we have examples of Roman glass, but they've chosen to take the starting point as the building of the Crystal Palace in 1851, because obviously it was made of glass, but also that was the start of the use of glass as an everyday material. Stained glass enjoyed a big revival in that era. And as a practical and as an ornamental kind of item, it really became popular. Lots of examples of how it's created, how it's blown, and some contemporary artists as well. There's a piece, for example, by Monster Chetwin. Do you know where else she's got an installation in London at the moment? There's one to scratch your head over, Hazel.
Not at the V&A?
No, underground at Gloucester Road Tube Station.
Oh!
Yes, and it's very interesting when you're going through on the eastbound Gloucester Road line, her illuminated pieces all along the side of the track there. That is a space which is normally used for art installations, and she has one there. She's a very creative person and has turned her skills to glassmaking as well.
Fantastic. I do love glass as an art form or a medium. I suppose when you talk about the Victorian stained glass, a lot of people don't really realise that a lot of the glass that we see in our churches now is Victorian, thanks to Cromwell years and having to rebuild some of our history on that. I remember one of my best times of going to Venice was to go to Murano and have a look at how they made their glass there. And I bought 2 fantastic vases, which still bring warmth to my heart when I look at them now. It's gorgeous the way that light hits it. And to see how it's used over the years is absolutely fantastic. So I'm looking forward to seeing this one. Now, you mentioned about the Astors. Do you want to get us into why the strong ties and describe of the Astor family with Two Temple Place?
Yeah, sure. The building was commissioned by William Waldorf Astor, who was the 3rd generation of the Astors. The original person that founded the Astor family was John Jacob Astor, and he emigrated from Germany. And he made his money importing, exporting furs, beaver furs. And he made so much money that his son continued and built and invested a lot in buying plots of land in Manhattan. and became the landlord of New York City. And so when William Waldorf Astor inherited the fortune from his father in 1890, his father, John Jacob Astor, had been known as the landlord of New York. Unfortunately, a lot of those buildings were slums and tenements, but he still made a lot of money out of them. And that made William Waldorf Astor reputedly the richest man in the world at the time.
Ooh.
But he had been based in New York, as all his family had been, and he had a couple of unfortunate incidents which drove him to find a new home, and he came to London. For example, he had tried public life. He'd been a senator briefly, but at that time the press was very looking for scandals, looking for headlines, and they found him to be a rather dull character on the public platform, and they ridiculed him. And he was quite a shy man, and he found that ridicule very hard to take. Also in society, he had a little falling out with his aunt, who insisted she was the Mrs. Astor, and there were no other Mrs. Astors to be had. And of course, society in those days was so around status and money. That was a downside. And also he worried about the security of his family. There were quite a lot of kidnappings, children's kidnappings and so forth going on. He decided to relocate his family, his wife and his 5 children to London. And of course, he had lots of money, so he bought himself a very nice house in Carlton Terrace. And he decided he needed an office building, and the site of 2 Temple Place would be ideal. And he gave the brief to the architect, John Loughborough Pearson, and he said, money no object here, build a suitable building. And he also was very clear about the security of the building. He was pretty hot on security. And in the basement, for example, there used to be a huge vault that covered most of the basement, and there were strong rooms where all the documents could be held, because we just invented the telephone in that era, which is, again, it's celebrated in the house, and cables and communication across the Atlantic was possible. So he was able to run his entire business empire from London, and that was his little fortress. And there are touches of a fortress, medieval castle in the design. There's crenellations along the outside. There's a little tower, which is where the staircase is. So it has little Gothic touches, although the style is a bit of a mixture of architectural styles from that era.
It is, isn't it? It is rather romantic, isn't it?
It is.
A romantic castle.
It's funny what you're saying about...
Yeah, it's funny what you're saying about John Loughborough Pearson, really, because it's beautiful romantic architecture, what we can see at 2 Temple Place. But knowing that he did so many churches and cathedrals, Peterborough being one, Leicester another, you can see that influence in this building design, can't you? And it's beautiful for what was initially an office.
It is. When John Loughborough Pearson was given that brief, he was told money no object. And he spent £250,000, which at today's value, they say is about 10 million. So it's certainly very lavish decoration inside, which I'm sure we'll get onto. But the outside is a sort of mixture of styles, and also incorporated Waldorf's idea of security. He was very hot on security. He had big vault. He had a huge vault in the basement. He had lots of strong rooms, although he didn't officially live there, he did have a little sanctuary there where he had a bedroom and a bathroom. And of course, in the basement, there were servants, a housekeeper and so forth that would have catered to his needs. And when his wife died, he pretty much permanently moved in there. He said he felt more secure among all the vaults and the strong rooms. And there was a little court case where he wanted to be registered as a Westminster resident at that address, and he won the case, and he was able to cast his vote as a resident of that area.
Fantastic. Who would have thought? If we're talking about the outside with this kind of, I suppose you can say, Gothic revival, it is beautiful. How would you describe the interior?
I would say it's a symphony in wood, because wood is the main material that's used. William Waldorf Astor doesn't seem very keen on works of art, unlike some of his contemporaries who collect a lot of paintings. He did collect sculpture, but he didn't want any representations on his wall, on his decorative scheme. Wood is the main thing. And as you go up the building, as you go from the ground floor to the first floor, you can see a change of use, because the ground floor is panelled in oak, quartered oak, which has that lovely grain. And that would have very much the place where his clerks worked, so he needed to be quite plain, wasn't distracting. But when he came into the building, he came through the double doors into a vestibule, which has, of course, a beautiful marble floor made of coloured gemstones, very much similar to his other masterpiece, the Fitzrovia Chapel, using the same craftsman. Robert Davidson was the craftsman on that. And so you come into this sort of Roman-style floor. He does mix his eras. And then the first thing that Astor would have seen was his magnificent mahogany staircase, which he indulged his love of literature. It's the first time you see it in Temple Place. It has these beautiful series of statues carved by John Nichols, who represent the characters from the Three Musketeers, which was apparently William Waldorf Astor's favourite book. So we start with D'Artagnan, and then on the left-hand side we have the other Musketeers. So we have Aramis, Athos, and Porthos. And on the other side we have other characters, Milady Midwinter and Barazon, who illustrate the whole series. So the staircase itself is sometimes overlooked because these statues are so amazing. They're about 18 inches tall and full of character. Aramis, for example, is looking quite interested. Apparently, if you look, one of the statues has a thumb missing because they take them off to clean them over the years, but I've never been able to spot the missing thumb, so it's very cleverly done. But it's beautiful detail on those statues. And as you go up the staircase, you come onto the balcony of the first floor, which is amazing. The pillars are made of ebony, and that length of ebony is not available now because ebony is really a bush. It's not a tree. It doesn't often grow that tall, and it's so rare they couldn't be replaced if they were ever lost. And we had the start of the use of more interesting wood. So though we had mahogany on the first floor, the panelling is pencil wood cedar, which strangely is from the juniper tree, but it's called pencilwood cedar. And if you get very close and sniff it, it does smell of pencils. That's the plain panelling, but above the panelling, because the stairway is lit by lovely stained glass by the firm Clayton & Bell, which is a little bit of a reflection of this exhibition being about glass. We've got all kinds of carvings there. We've got carvings, 6 figures that represent 3 of William Waldorf Astor's favourite American novels. So we've got Last of the Mohicans, represented The Scarlet Letter, and Rip Van Winkle. So 6 really large statues. Then above that, there are some more carved friezes, which each represent a different Shakespearean play. So he's mixing English and American literature because those were his favourites. And then you go on to the library, which that side of the building is quite shady, particularly when the Middle Temple Library overlooked it. They decided on satinwood, which is a very shiny wood, a very light-coloured wood, as it would amplify the light in that room. And these carvings are done of walnut. And there was once a lovely marble fireplace there, but that was removed after the war. But it's still a lovely room, and it was Astor's private library where he used to retreat to in the afternoons. I think I picture him there with his cigar and his brandy or whatever, perhaps having a little nap in the afternoon. And a lovely room when the sun shines on that satinwood and the little walnut. Although all the books have gone, the bookcases are still there and they're used for the exhibition. They're an excellent little cubby holes for little exhibits to go in. And above them is a line of little cherubs, little putti, who represent the modern arts. So although one has traditionally got a little globe, another one's got a microscope to show the modern science art. It's a lovely little room. And then the main hall, the largest hall, of course, is a stunning visage in every aspect of it. Is so wonderful. It's a hammerbeam roof. You mentioned John Loughborough Pearson, very much sort of a medievalist, loved the old churches. And for a time, he was in charge of works at Westminster, and he renovated Westminster Hall. And obviously, he enjoyed the hammerbeam, the original medieval hammerbeam roof there. And he recreated a slightly smaller version in this room. So it's got a magnificent hammerbeam roof. But of course, it doesn't stop there. The beautiful panelling, there's carved fireplaces. What strikes visitors usually first is there's a frieze of gilded faces around the top of the room, and they're completely random. They're just characters that William Waldorf Astor loved, either real people or imaginary people. So you've got Ophelia from Shakespeare, but you've also got Bismarck. You've got all the sort of heroines. He liked a tragic heroine. You've got all tragic heroines, Mary Queen of Scots and so forth. And they're in no particular order. So you'll get someone from the 14th century next to someone from the 19th century. They're not grouped in any way, but there originally were 50 of these gilded faces around there. A few of them were lost during the war. The end of the building was damaged and was reconstructed. And then above the frieze of faces, on the Hammerbeam roof, there's a series of statues again, which are from Ivanhoe by Walter Scott. So you've got Maid Marian and Robin Hood and so forth. And the story goes with those that the carver, the craftsman that created them, just did them in wood originally. But Astor's eyesight was fading a little bit by this time, so he asked to have them gilded so he could see them more clearly. And the carver wasn't so keen on that idea. And as a little kind of reminder, there's a beautiful door, and above the door there's an angry Putti, a tiny little cherub who's got his arms folded and is looking rather cross, which is not, and his pose isn't a normal pose that you'd see a cherub in. And below the cherub is a beautiful gilded door, which was done by George Frampton, who you may know, he did Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens.
Oh, of course.
Yes. So this is three-dimensional raised metalwork, and it depicts 9 maidens of the Arthurian legends. So you've got Guinevere and you've got the Lady of the Lake. And they would have been directly opposite, because the photographs show that Astor had his desk facing that door, and all his objects and his collections around him. He would have had some of his statues. And he even had sort of mannequins in medieval dress around him as well. I don't know. It's strange that the other pictures show of his time there. And in the next room, which is now the shop, that room was entirely a strong room, so it has no decoration at all. But now we have some nice William Morris wallpaper on there. And that's the part that's open to the public. There are other little nooks and crannies that you can see into that are still used as offices for the Bulldog Trust.
It sounds like a very personal building project.
It was, it absolutely was. He really indulged his love of literature and how he wanted to be surrounded, because he could spend whatever money he liked. And that may be why his family sold it after he died. He died in 1919, and it was empty for a couple of years, and it was bought in 1922. And luckily for us, this comes to your other question really about how it's been preserved over time. It's really had 3 very careful owners until the Bulldog Trust. And I wonder if the family decided to dispose of it, partly because they moved some of their offices back to States, but because it was so personal, whether these descendants really took that style. And of course, fashions change, tastes change. It was very ornate. The first guardians of it, first custodians, were an insurance company, Sun Life of Canada, but they were only there for 6 years till 1928. And then it was bought by the Society of Incorporated Accountants and Auditors. And it worked well for their uses because they were able to not only use it as offices, but also as a social space for their members, which, of course, Astor's rooms really lent themselves to that as well. And we're lucky that they were the custodians during the Second World War. They saved the stained glass, they preserved it, and they rebuilt very carefully after the war in a very similar style to what had been before, and preserved a lot of it through that. One thing they did change was the original doorway to the building was completely destroyed by an incendiary bomb just outside. And that had been, again, very personal. It had the Waldorf family crest above it, because William Waldorf Astor was very conscious of his heritage. He'd created this family crest. So it was, and it added to the sort of Gothic baronial look of the building. When it was destroyed during the war, it was simply replaced by a much simpler wooden doorway, and the window above was enlarged to compensate in the sort of balance of the building. And a new wing was added, but so subtly done, so well done, that you wouldn't really know unless you could pick out slightly more modern carving. The accountants were very good custodians, but they gave up the building in 1902, the pharmaceutical company Smith and Nephew. inventors of the elastoplast. That's where they made their money. But again, they were very good custodians. They did change the entrance foyer area. They updated it. They gave it a couple of modern 1960s touches, new lamps, seating area, which is upholstered in reindeer leather, and a lovely pendant clock, which is a very modern sort of style. But it all works quite well in the style in that area. And that area wasn't particularly decorative before. And they did little touches to the building. They put fire guards on the radiators. It was one of the very first buildings to have central heating. Right when Astor built it, it was one of the first buildings to have electricity, which is celebrated in the little lamp posts outside. And so after Smith and Nephew, they were there from 1959 to 1999, and then it was bought by Sir Richard Hoare, who established the Bulldog Trust to look after it. We've been lucky that the custodians haven't changed very much, and also they have maintained the fabric of the building, which any historic building needs that to keep going.
Yeah, that's very good. Especially as you were saying, very personal, but also as styles and requirements of an office building change. So we're very lucky to have this one. Now, there was something that you said at the very beginning about the choice of location for Two Temple Place. But why did Astor choose that particular location?
I think he was quite impressed that it was next to Middle Temple, a lot of history there. Astor was a complete history buff. As well as his original townhouse, Carlton House, he bought Cliveden, which he renovated. He bought Hever Castle, which he renovated. Yeah. He had quite a thing about Anne Boleyn. I think she appeared in quite a few of his things. And apparently he even had the rosary that's supposed to have belonged to her. I think he liked the historical aspect of it being next to Middle Temple. As I say, originally it was next to the library that was destroyed during the war, which was a huge Victorian building with a steep gable. Mm-hmm. And that kind of influenced the look of the building when he was working with his architect to reflect that kind of historic outlook. He qualified as a lawyer himself. He studied law, so he perhaps liked the fact that it was law. But also I think it was because that land was quite reasonable. It was new land. In the embankment in front of it was created in the 1860s to take the sewage pipe and the district line underground. So that was new ground. That was going to be always going to be landscaped as a garden, and it has many statues in it as well. I'm sure that would have appealed to Astor. And so this land, it made defunct all the riverside activities that had taken place in the north of that area. So I think the land was quite reasonable because it was out of fashion and its uses had changed. There was nobody, perhaps but him, had the foresight to see it would be such a lively area linked to these other nearby facilities. I think it was the land came up at the right point, and it had the historical links that he liked. It was just called Approach Road. When he bought it, it was just seen as a road that you approach Middle Temple with. It didn't have its own character. But I think that his building helped to, and there are other professional buildings in the road as well, helped to give it a little bit more interest and stability.
I suppose also the location is helpful when he purchased the Pall Mall Gazette and all the printing presses, etc., the Observer on Fleet Street. He was in it all, wasn't he?
I think he loved literature. He had literary aspirations. He wrote novels himself, didn't he? And they were quite well received. Apparently, the first one he did have published anonymously, so its reviews would be real. But of course, he did fall out with the editor of the Pall Mall Gazette because he wanted to publish his own stories in it, and he created the magazine so that he could publish his own stories. Buying the Observer was a thing later in life once he was established to add to his empire. His publishing empire.
There's a connection you've mentioned with Downton Abbey, because you mentioned about George Frampton and the statue of Peter Pan, which is in Downton Abbey, but also Two Temple Place and that beautiful staircase is used when Lady Rose gets married.
Yes, it stood in for Caxton Hall. And you do notice, I jump up and down now when I'm seeing a TV series or a film, there's a corner of a staircase or an office used. I think the most well-known use for filming was Bridget Jones's Diary. It's been filmed there. And in one of the early films, she's sitting waiting. I think it's supposed to be a doctor's waiting room. She's sitting under one of the beautiful stained glass windows in the main hall, and with the light coming behind her. But they did use it for later ones. But you often just see a corridor, a panel corridor. I enjoyed the use. It was made of a recent film of Blythe Spirit with Judi Dench played Mrs. Arcati, the medium. And she comes to the offices of the Society of Mediums or something, and it's the Astor's main office, and it was in its Victorian heyday, so it looked scrumptious, even dressed with fake office accoutrements. It looked very impressive for that kind of organisation. So yes, apparently Batman and all kinds of things like that have been filmed there. Because people wonder as well, the building is only open 4 months a year for the art exhibition from January to April, and it's closed the rest of the year. They're encouraging more open days to happen. Any fundraising they do through the building being open, selling souvenirs and books and things, any donations people make, help the fabric of the building itself. It's for them to put on more art exhibitions and more activities. In the summer, they open for a couple of days. Family trails, they have some artworks developed for families. And of course, they open for open house in September. But apart from that, the rest of the year, they use for private functions. Weddings are very popular, obviously, a magnificent setting for a wedding, corporate functions, and filming. Of course, this last year with the writer's strike, there hasn't been so much filming, but it's certainly on the list of places that are well used for filming. And because it's closed, it's obviously easier to set up a filming apparatus there.
Yeah, of course. If anybody hasn't been to Two Temple Place, then now is your opportunity to go. Maggie, when does the exhibition is already open? When does it close?
It finishes at the end of April, just after Easter it closes. It's open Tuesdays to Sundays. The opening hours this year are going to be a little later, so it opens at 11 and stays open until 6. And the idea is that people perhaps can come after work. It's shorter hours on a Sunday. And it's open late every Wednesday. And during the late night Wednesdays, we actually sell alcohol, beers and wine. And there's entertainment. There's a full programme of activities going on in the evenings. There's also workshops and talks. And if you look on the website for Two Temple Place, it'll tell you all about those and how to book. So
wonderful.
There are tours done of the building as well. You can book for those.
Excellent. Plenty to look forward to. We'll put a link to all of that in the show notes as well, so you've got everything all in one place. Maggie, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Hazel.
That's all for now. Until next time.